In December of 2024, a strange fog swallowed Los Angeles. It stank of chemicals, left purple stains on cars, and refused to lift. At first, people blamed pollution, until identical reports came from across the globe. Birds fell silent, animals panicked, and humans began to suffer with burning eyes, vivid nightmares, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Join me as we explore this bizarre and very recent happening of which I had some first-hand experience. But before we explore mine, let us first start at the beginning. December 2024 began like any other winter month in Los Angeles. Busy streets, festive lights, and the faint hum of holiday cheer. But on the fifth day of the month, a dense fog rolled in, blanketing the city. And at first glance, it appeared to be nothing unusual. A kind of low-hanging mist that occasionally settled over the skyline. But something about this fog was off. It carried an acrid, chemical stench, sharp and bitter, reminiscent of gunpowder after fireworks. It clung to surfaces, leaving behind an unsettling purple residue that smeared like oil and glittered faintly under the streetlights. Residents shrugged it off as smog or pollution, a minor inconvenience in a city used to atmospheric oddities. But what began as a peculiar weather anomaly soon spiraled into something far more sinister. Theo, a 34-year-old contractor, was driving home through the outskirts of Los Angeles when he first noticed the fog. He was distracted, half listening to a heated debate on talk radio, when the pale haze caught his eye, draped over the distant skyline like a ghostly veil. Curious, he rolled down his window, expecting the familiar scent of damp earth or car exhaust. Instead, his nose was assaulted by a chemical tang so strong it made him wince. "Gunpowder," he muttered, puzzled. The smell conjured memories of 4th of July fireworks, but this wasn't a celebration. Still, he dismissed it, chalking it up to the usual pollutants of a sprawling metropolis, and continued home. Yet the fog lingered in his thoughts. Over the next few days, Theo noticed strange comments from neighbors and shopkeepers. A cashier at the hardware store complained about the residue left by the morning haze, a film that wouldn't scrub off of her car windows, no matter how hard she tried. Theo's neighbor, an early riser, mentioned waking up to the same acrid smell drifting into her bedroom through open windows before sunrise. But this was Los Angeles, so smog is practically a part of the scenery. Despite himself, Theo couldn't help but glance up at the sky more often. He watched the haze hover near the horizon, unmoving, colorless, and oppressively still. Something about it made him uneasy. He told himself it was just his imagination. By mid-December, the fog wasn't just an LA problem. Social media lit up with posts from Tampa Bay, Manchester, Sydney, and beyond. The descriptions were eerily similar. The sulfuric smell, the strange residue, and the sense of something being wrong. "This isn't rain," one user wrote, attaching photos of faint purple streaks on their windshield. "This fog is making me sick. Headaches and nausea. What's going on?" Another post from the UK described how the fog had settled over Manchester for 4 days straight, a suffocating blanket that refused to dissipate. "It's not like normal fog," the user claimed. "It doesn't lift. It just lingers, thick and chemical, like it's alive." The global chatter unsettled Theo. He found himself scrolling late into the night, consuming post after post. People described flickering lights, erratic animal behavior, and an unshakable sense of dread. Wildlife seemed particularly affected. Birds stopped singing, dogs whimpered and pawed at doors, and livestock refused to enter fog-covered fields. In Germany, a farmer described how his cattle avoided the misty patches on his property, their normally placid demeanor replaced with visible agitation. In Western Australia, kangaroos were seen huddled together in tight groups, avoiding the fog as if it were a predator. It was as though the animals sensed something that humans could not. By New Year's Eve, local news outlets began addressing the fog. Most dismissed it as an unusual weather phenomenon, persistent advection fog, or perhaps a temperature inversion trapping pollutants. A few scientists speculated that the sulfuric smell might be linked to industrial activity. But beneath the surface, most people weren't buying it. One man in Boston, curious and skeptical, collected snow that had fallen during the fog. Under his microscope, he found something chilling: particles of an unidentifiable purple substance. When the snow melted, it didn't turn to water, but instead left an oily, iridescent smear. He shared his findings online, sparking widespread fear. Was the fog truly natural, or was it something deliberately engineered? Reports of illness surged. People complained of sore throats, fatigue, and relentless headaches. Some described vivid, reoccurring nightmares. And strangely, these dreams were shared, identical accounts from people thousands of miles apart. It was as if the fog had wormed its way into their minds. Speculation grew darker. A conspiracy theorist pointed to Operation Sea Spray, a cold-era military experiment where the U.S. Navy released bacteria over San Francisco to test biological warfare. Could this be something similar? Others believed the fog was carrying a toxic compound, like sulfur dioxide, mixed with a mysterious microorganism engineered for nefarious purposes. As the fog spread, so did the fear. In Tampa Bay, residents found their cars coated in a metallic, unremovable substance after the fog passed. In Manchester, outdoor lights flickered as the haze thickened. A farmer in Germany reported that the fog rolled into his village. The birds went silent, and his normally placid dogs howled at the door. And then there were the drones. Unmanned aerial vehicles spotted hovering in the fog's wake, as if monitoring its movements. By mid-January, the fog had cemented itself as a source of unease across the globe. It was no longer just a strange weather anomaly. It was a harbinger of something far more sinister. Social media was ablaze with unsettling videos, panicked posts, and other wild theories. Communities in Tampa Bay, Manchester, and Los Angeles shared tales of an invisible menace, spreading like a shadow over their lives. Reports of illness became more frequent and severe. What started as mild headaches and sore throats escalated into alarming symptoms. People described burning sensations in their eyes, violent coughing fits, and an overwhelming sense of fatigue that left them bedridden. One woman in Sydney claimed that she could barely eat for days, her stomach twisting into painful knots even after a few bites of food. And another man, again in Germany, reported an unshakable fever, his skin pale and clammy, despite no diagnosis from perplexed doctors. And then there were the nightmares. People exposed to the fog described reoccurring dreams that defied explanation. The dreams weren't fragmented or nonsensical like most, but vivid and terrifyingly coherent. A woman in Tampa Bay recounted seeing a glowing purple light hovering in the darkness, watching her and pulsing like a heartbeat. Thousands of miles away, a man in the UK described the exact same vision, down to the faint humming noise the light emitted. It felt alive, he wrote on social media, like it was waiting for something. Online forums buzzed with accounts of shared experiences of people who had never met, recounting identical imagery in their dreams. Some speculated the fog was not just a chemical phenomenon, but a form of psychological manipulation. A weapon, not of destruction, but of control. As the fog thickened, it began to affect the world in ways that seemed impossible. In Boston, a neighborhood reported that streetlights flickered and dimmed whenever the fog rolled in. In Los Angeles, Theo's roommate swore he saw their microwave spark to life on its own as a thicker patch of fog passed by their window. Over in Germany, residents noticed their car engines stuttering or outright failing when the haze enveloped their streets, as if it carried an electromagnetic pulse, disrupting anything it touched. But the strangest occurrences involved animals. In rural parts of Australia, farmers began reporting bizarre behavior among livestock. Entire herds of cattle stood frozen, staring into the fog, as though hypnotized. Dogs barked and whimpered at empty fields, their ears pinned back and tails tucked. In a small village near Bavaria, a woman claimed to find dozens of dead birds strewn across her backyard one morning. Their tiny bodies were unscathed, yet their eyes were wide open, fixed in expressions of pure terror. It wasn't just the living creatures that were affected. People began finding their cars, homes, and even plants coated in that strange metallic residue after the fog passed. Attempts to clean it proved futile. It resisted scrubbing, pressure washing, and even industrial solvents. One man hired a professional cleaning service to remove the substance from his car. 2 days and hundreds of dollars later, it disappeared on its own, as if it had never been there at all. In neighborhoods around the world, people stopped venturing outdoors. Schools closed, citing unusual environmental conditions. Supermarkets were overrun by panicked shoppers, stockpiling food, bottled water, and masks. Some communities took to burning incense or lighting candles in hopes that the smoke would ward off whatever toxins were lingering in the air. A few desperate individuals donned gas masks, their silhouettes hauntingly dystopian as they wandered through the fog. By January 15th, the fog had enveloped large swaths of the globe. Governments maintained their stance, calling it a seasonal anomaly, but their reassurances rang hollow. People who had experienced the fog firsthand knew better. Hospitals were quietly filling with patients suffering from unexplained respiratory illnesses. Schools and offices in affected areas began implementing fog days, where operations ceased until the haze lifted. Theo, watching from his Los Angeles suburb, could feel the tension tightening like a noose around his community. Cars sat idle in driveways, their owners too wary to leave. The streets, once alive with noise and movement, had fallen eerily silent. And one night, unable to sleep, Theo stepped onto his porch and stared into the fog. The chemical taste clung to the back of his throat, and for the first time he felt a presence. He couldn't see anything through the swirling gray, but he felt certain that something was out there, watching. It was no longer a question of what the fog was, but what it wanted. But whatever the answer, Theo wasn't sure the world was ready to know. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, on top of other people's experiences with this strange fog, me and my fiancée Megan had our own experiences as well. On December 25th of 2024, Christmas night, we felt called, almost, to head back down to Kentucky to explore some caves together with our friend Bob from Tales from the Dark. Over the last year, we have explored many places, including caves, but the fact that it was almost a collective fever to do this was interesting to say the least. So after hanging out with mostly my family that day and giving and unwrapping gifts, roughly as the sun went down, a thick fog too began to roll into our area. I noticed it became exceptionally thick when we were getting gas before we decided to hit the road, start the long multi-state trip. We were going to go from Kansas to southern Missouri, and then from there, Bob would take over from me and on to Somerset, Kentucky. Roughly a 13 or 14-hour drive, if I'm not mistaken, from the moment that we left our town. With the fog rolling in, the first thing I noticed was that bizarre smell of gunpowder. It was reminiscent of the 4th of July and/or a heavy chimney fire, and I have to say that it hits differently when it's cold outside as well. And that day it was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. I began to drive us, and the visual restrictions due to the fog were heavy. I thought the more I drove out of Kansas, the more it would dissipate. That indeed would not be the case, because all of Kansas and Missouri were blanketed in this thick, misty fog. Due to where we started and where we ended up going to meet Bob to continue down to Kentucky, I drove almost the full length of Kansas and then Missouri. While I was driving, I noticed a large amount of animals outside. I counted 68 in total, of all kinds, from deer to possums, skunks, raccoons, frogs, and squirrels. It was just odd to see so many wandering about, as if lost or confused. And having made that drive multiple times, it was definitely unnerving to say the least, because I had never seen that many animals out in a single drive. As I kept driving, I noticed a strange debris or film that kept forming on our windshield. It was streaky and smeared almost like a heavy dirt or mud, but fortunately, it did keep washing off with our washer fluid and wipers. We would drive through some fog headed from Missouri to Kentucky, but it was all but gone by the time we reached Somerset. I, however, like many people, got sick following driving through it. But fortunately, it only lasted for roughly 24 hours while we were there. Heading back through the same eerie fog, it continued to be both unnerving as well as a visual impairment hazard. Heading through Missouri and then to Kansas and back to our house roughly a day and a few hours later. Overall, it was a short trip for those wandering. I again found myself sick with the exact same symptoms I had previously had while we were in Kentucky after driving through the fog the first time. I also noticed while driving on the way back the same exact debris smearing on my windshield and windows. But after getting back home and what have you, and the fog dissipating several days after being back, once I was feeling better, I assumed any dirt or what have you was just from the drive itself. I washed it off my car, and although I didn't realize things at the time, it could have perhaps had a weird color to it, and maybe I didn't notice. But fortunately for me, it did wash off, as opposed to others. My cousin Brett, also known as Phobicon here on YouTube, was the first to tell me about the fog, but I didn't realize there was more to it at first. I also didn't realize just how far it had reached, and that me and thousands of other people not only had similar experiences, but some people arguably had a much worse time than I did dealing with whatever this haze or fog truly was. Was it some kind of chemical agent, trapped environmental debris, or pollution, and regular fog, like many have said, or something else? I can't be so sure, although I'd like to think it was just some kind of pollution. And although I did very much get sick dealing with it multiple times, it's also important to note that it is cold and flu season. There have also been many stomach viruses going around. The correlation doesn't always mean causation. There very well could have been an outside factor. But either way, it certainly was strange. But what do you think? And did you also have an experience with this weird fog? Let me know down in the comments below. I did also want to thank my friend over at What Lurks Beneath for also encouraging me to make this video. Please also like this video if you liked it, share it around, and subscribe with notifications if you haven't already. All that stuff really does help me out tremendously and helps us continue to grow as a channel and as a community. With that, guys, I know this is a bit of a departure from my regular content, but when I can make something more current or trending, it definitely helps the channel as a whole. But check out the video I did on the Galway ghost before this one, and let me know what you think there as well. And I will see you guys again very soon with another brand new full-length video and/or episode. As always, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time.